What's up, everybody? Welcome to another special IG live chat. This one's really awesome, really something that I've been looking forward to. Somebody I've been really looking forward to speaking. I will be talking to the founder of Latinx Parenting, Leslie Priscilla. She's a first generation Chicana mother of three. 14 years of experience with Latino parents and children and families. She's a certified parent coach. She has a dual degree in child development and family studies from Cal State University, Long Beach. This is, kind of a dream of mine. Again, one of the reasons why I wanted to do these IG lives is to talk to people that I see on social media that I would love to have a conversation with. So let's bring her, without further ado, let's bring on Leslie. Let's see. Excited that she would come on and talk to me. Let's see if she can decolonize my parenting mind. Hey, Leslie,
Hey,
what's up?
bud. What's up? How you doing?
I'm great. Good to see you. Good to meet you, or virtually meet you anyway. Um, I've been listening to past podcasts you were on. I listened to the podcast you were on with Amada, like a year ago. And I've been, I think like everybody who's in here has been following Latinx Parenting, the account on whatever they're following it on. I'm a older millennial, so for me it's Instagram, but you're everywhere. And ending chancla culture, just the things that for me, seeing another Latino, Latina saying about the way we were raised that was like, hey, that was fucked up. We've gone so long with joking about things, but now you are not only speaking about it, but you're a professional. So I feel like people can open up to you and be like, hey, yeah, we know that it's fucked up, but why is it fucked up? And so that's why I'm bringing you on here so you can talk about the work that you do and why we have to change our notions of Latino culture as it pertains to parenting. But first of all, introduce yourself to everybody. Let them know what you. I gave you a pretty glowing introduction, but I like people to introduce themselves too.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think first and foremost, it's Dia de las Madres Mexicanas. I am a Madre Mexicana, so I always start with that because I feel like that is such an all-encompassing role, being a mother, right, to these three kids, not only to the three kids, but also to like my inner niña, which I talk about a lot in the work as well. But I am the founder of Latinx Parenting, which I started in 2018. And when I started it, it really was just, I had been working with parents for years before that. But I really wanted to root it in our cultural strengths. And so there were things that I noticed in working with families of various cultures that were common among all cultures. And then there were things that I noticed in Latino families and Latina families that I saw in my family growing up, because I'm a child of immigrants. My mom and dad came here from Mexico in the 70s and the 80s. And so when I became a mother, or even when I got pregnant, I was like, there's a lot of things I don't want to do to my child, or ways of being I don't want to be with my child, because I remembered how it made me feel, right? And so I think that connection back to that inner niña is like first and foremost the thing that I encourage all of us to do. But in working with Latinx families, I'm like, we're so strong and we're so rich and we're so complex, and our history is beautiful, but it's also something that causes us a lot of grief. And so the spaces that I create with Latinx Parenting are to kind of address that, right? To address the celebration, the resilience that we have as a people, the beauty, the capacity for love and connection that we see among our families. And then to also address the wounds, right? To also address the historical impacts of oppression on our families, right? So the adaptations that we have taken to kind of like survive, right? Which often are not the best things for our children and the generations that are to come. And so I started Latinx Parenting to address those things, because I was reading parenting books written by white folks, and I was like, where is my family in this, right? Where is my cultura in this? Where are my people in this? And I didn't see it. And I am writing a book right now to kind of talk about, you mentioned chancla culture, to talk about where the roots of our parenting practices actually are, to bring in a lot more honoring of indigeneity and the ways that we have adapted, all of those collectivist ways of being, right, from our cultura into our families, and to really support that for people. But I've just been learning a lot. I feel like I'm a forever student. I never consider myself an expert. I never come on to any, onto any stage or into any space believing that I know everything, because I'm still very much learning, just from the stories that are shared with me, right? And the spaces that I run. I'm just like, I'm so honored to be in this position where I can receive and hold all of these stories, and ensure that people feel safe in being able to express them.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're doing, like I said, you're doing really important work. And I do want to talk about the roots of, chancla culture and beyond, because, I see that you get a lot of pushback from Latinos saying, well, it's part of Latino culture to pinch and to yell and to, the chancla. And you talk about, how that's not the case. It's, comes from colonialism. But before we get into that, I mean, what are some of the things that, just generally, what are some of the things that patterns of thinking, patterns of behavior that you see among Latinos when they talk about, when they're practicing parenting?
Yeah, I think that our approach to engaging with children, whether you're a parent or a caregiver or a teacher, for our culture, because oppression like is something that's still very much alive, right? Like, we are beyond marginalized as a people. We're still exploited oftentimes. And so sometimes we feel like we deserve that oppression or that exploitation or that, what is it, like sometimes the violence, right? So we think about ourselves as children, and I'll hear people say like, oh, a mí me dieron mis nalgadas, or I was spanked, but I deserved it, right? I deserve this. And so that was one of the moments that I had once when I was running a group, and a señor said, I deserved all of the beatings that I got. And a lot of everybody in that room was nodding, and I'm just looking around, and I'm just like, wow, there is this sense that we deserve less than to be honored, to be considered sacred, to have our needs met, right? And so I think because we are survivors of colonialism, right? We are survivors of this historical oppression. A lot of that oppression has become internalized in us. And so we think about ourselves as deserving violence. We think about ourselves as children as having deserved that violence. And that carries over into what children deserve now, our children deserve, right? And so we see children as, I'm not saying it's just us, because to be honest with you, childism or adultism or whatever you want to call it, like, this is something that's common among all cultures, especially those that are touched by colonization.
Explain. I mean, I've never heard of childism. That's the first time I've heard hearing that word, adultism. What is that?
Okay, so it's basically, we've heard of like white supremacy, right? And so white supremacy is defined as this idea that, like, if you are white, or if you are, lighter in your skin color, that it makes you better, essentially.
Right.
And so when you think about adult supremacy in that way too, is like, adults always have, the right way of being. We're always, our needs are always deferred to, right? If my child is having an emotional experience, that's not as important as what I'm experiencing as the parent, and I'm going to need them to shut up so that I can, as the adult, collect myself, right? And so we have the treatment of children overall historically has been really poor in European countries specifically. And so what happened historically is that children in Europe were not seen basically as human beings, right? They weren't seen as whole and complete people. And those ideologies carried over into this land, onto this land, when colonization began. And so whereas, the indigenous people of this land, I'm not saying all indigenous people, and the indigenous people in Africa, we actually had kinship, we had collaboration with children, we had an honoring of the child, an honoring of the child's spirit. And so when people say this is white people shit, I'm like, actually, the white people shit was the oppression of children, which carried over onto this
I
land.
love that.
And we adapted it in order to survive. Because, and the same way that we adapted white supremacy, the same way that we adapted, you know, really toxic religious dogmas that like keep us separate. And so, you know, sometimes it's called childism, sometimes it's called adultism. Feels, you know, an easy way to kind of explain it, right? Like adults are always the ones that are prioritized in the relationship. And so again, this is common like throughout the world. This isn't just something that our cultura experiences. When I talk about chancla culture, it's the way that it's expressed specifically in our culture, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No. I mean, it's the knowledge that that's pouring out of you is astounding. Because you know, like I saw you say, you know, especially to what was her name, Amara, right?
Mhm.
You know, that the chancla culture. You said that there is no anthropological record of corporal punishment towards children in, you know, pre-Columbian societies or in Africa, and so the way that we cling to, you know, the chancla culture as if it's a cultural artifact that we need to preserve and that we need to cherish, and that white people are trying to take away the chanclas is kind of sad. It's kind of gross about how violence enacted on us as children we kind of cling to as adults, even though we know it's wrong.
Yeah, I mean we're bonded through it sometimes, right? And you'll see people all over, even just today, right? Like we have Dia de las Madres Mexicanas and from other Latin American countries, and you'll start to see the chancla memes come up, and you'll start to say like, thanks to the chancla, I was, you know, I was raised correctly or whatever. Our parents used la chancla and other methods like it, whether it was corporal punishment or verbal chancletazos or shaming, because they didn't have another resource in those moments, right? Like very rarely do we have anybody getting to the point of corporal punishment who is self-regulated, who is, you know, calm. Like there was a point of, and I have experienced this too, right? As a parent to 3 children, it's so hard to not get activated by the normal behaviors that children express. And so I'm not here to like shame our parents. I'm not here to shame us if we have spanked, if we have, you know, used those verbal chancletazos, etc. But I do want us to recognize that these are adaptations into the family, right? These are adaptations that for us feel normal because it's so common. And when we see it represented in media, when we see the chancla memes and chancla videos and stuff, it makes us laugh. And that laughter is not bad. It's not bad to experience that sense of joy. However, when we are sharing them and we're creating that content, it's normalizing that this is how our culture, this is how our people treat children, right? And so when you think about how do Latino parents raise their kids, oftentimes the first go-to thought is with la chancla or in these ways. And so what I'm trying to normalize with the End Chancla Culture movement is that we're more than that as Latino parents. You know, as Latino parents, we have the capacity to connect with children. We don't have to operate from those survival strategies anymore. We do deserve to have our needs met. I've said often, like, I don't necessarily believe in like bad parents, right? Like I believe in under-resourced parents. I believe in parents that have mental health challenges because they didn't get their needs met as children either. I believe in parents that don't have their needs met because they're still battling constant racism and constant marginalization in other ways, right? And so my belief is that we deserve as Latino parents to be able to parent in ways that are aligned with our needs and with our children's needs, right? There needs to be a balance. It cannot be either or. Either I'm super authoritarian or I'm super permissive, right? Either I'm super individualistic or I'm super collectivist. Dr. Manuel Samaripa is a teacher of mine, and he talks about this continuum of collectivism and individualism, right? And so as we're teaching values, we're all on this continuum. And so it's the way that we're teaching the values that needs to shift sometimes. It's not the value itself, right? Latino parents' biggest value is respeto, familismo, right? So those are the two. It's like, I need to teach you to be respectful. How do children learn respect, right? Well, they learn it by experiencing that respect first. But the way that
a lot of parents think that fear and respect are the same thing, right?
yes, and that's what I was going to. And so in the spaces that I facilitate, it's like, let's have that conversation. Like, were you actually learning to respect your parents, or were you learning to fear them? You know, and oftentimes that's like the first time that a lot of these folks have thought like, okay, I was afraid, you know, I was actually afraid. And so we begin to kind of honor that inner child's journey, and we begin to connect it to the historical, right? So it's the historical, the institutional, and it goes down into the culture, into the family, into the individual. And so what Resmaa Menakem talks about, he says, you know, at some point it starts to look like culture and personality, but it's actually this historical adaptation that has happened, right? Where we're so removed from that trauma that we don't even realize what's happening. We don't even realize that this is what's being normalized. And we don't necessarily have to live there anymore. You know, we don't have to live in this sensation that we deserve violence, or that we deserve anything less than having our needs met.
Yeah, there's a lot there again. I was just like glued to what you're saying. But yeah, what I wanted to say, I should have said this disclaimer. You know, I'm a stepdad. My stepdaughter is 18, about to be 19. I've raised her since she was 5. You know, taught her how to count, read, all that stuff. We've never hit her, obviously, and me or her mom didn't even think of it, because I had and I'm sure you get this. People always come to you with their war stories. You know, I had a very traumatic childhood. My dad was a Chicago police officer, crack addict, and, you know, used everything with violence. And, you know, one time he was beating me with something. He was a big dude, you know, boxed in the Army. He was beating me for something, and I think I was in preschool, and I was screaming, and he said, "Papi, I'm doing this because I love you." And, you know, at the time, it just confused me. I didn't accept it, but I didn't understand. I knew that it was wrong, but I was young. I didn't know how to accept that. But like, and the other thing that you said, and so maybe that makes you want to comment on that. But the other thing that you said that was for sure something that I resonated with was that there are no bad parents. I remember when I was a kid, you know, I used to think my dad was a terrible person. And then when she left my mom, when my mom left him and we went to live with my mom, I thought my mom was doing everything wrong, and that when I grew up, I would do this, that, and the other. Now I realize, you know, being her age and being the age that she was when I was having those thoughts about her, I'm like, man, like, she's an immigrant from Honduras. She was doing the best that she could. Like, she didn't know, there was no Instagram. There was no Latinx parenting account on Instagram that she can get some tips from. Everybody around her was telling her the same thing. So I guess the question there is, I mean, I don't know if I have a question, but like, what is that what I just told you? Help me, help me, you know, reconcile that, or help me understand what's going on there.
I just want to like hold it with you for a little bit.
Oof. It's on a Wednesday.
We have to.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the hard part of decolonizing, is to just sit with it.
Yeah, I've sat with it for a very long time, and I finally forgive. You know, I'm not the best friends with my dad. You know, he texts me on birthdays and holidays and stuff like that. But, you know, I just finally forgave my mom like a year ago. I said, hey, you know, me and my mom hated each other forever because I blamed her for everything that was going on with my life and the way she raised me. You know, because my dad was super strict, and then my mom was super liberal, hands off. She worked night shifts and slept during the day. So I've never been grounded. After my dad, I've never been grounded. I've never had any discipline at all. And so I kind of blame her for my discipline problems in my adult life. But then I realized, you know, I've finally forgave her. I'm like, you know, you're just a person. You forget that your parents are people, you know?
Yeah. We get to a point, right, where we realize that we can't dehumanize our parents, as we are not trying to dehumanize our children, right? And we can't dehumanize ourselves either. It's really hard to think about that internal experience for a parent that would get to the point of doing that to you, you know, and to believe that that was a loving thing to do. Like that, there's so much gravity there. There's so much weight to that.
And I know that his dad especially beat him. So he was dealing with that probably, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And they didn't have, again, the privilege of being
Right.
able to reflect, the privilege of being able to take space, of go to therapy, like, and mind you, you know, the stigma of mental health at that time, like there wasn't what we have now. And so I think part of this is also like recognizing the privilege that comes with being able to reflect, right? Being able to think, okay, if this is what happened to me, what do I want to do different? You know, there's so much power in that, and there's so much power in being able to repair ruptures and to reconnect after disconnecting, you know. And so we're moving away from that survival, because that was coming from a place of survival for him, for her, for my parents, also for my tios, you know. And the things that I witnessed, because I was never beat, I was hit. I got el gancho, I got, you know, I remember my mom hit me twice with a hanger, and mostly like with her hand. And I remember like marks on my body, and she would like, it wasn't a big deal, you know, because for her, and when she found out that I was like having this en chancla culture thing, she was like, I wish I had gotten la chancla, because what I got was so much worse, right? And so for our parents, like there was this belief that what they were doing was not as bad as what they got. I still yell, you know what I mean? Like I still sometimes find myself yelling at my kids. So the expectation is not that we're perfect, and it's not that we're not human. It's that we recognize that we have these wounds, and these wounds are ready to be healed, not just in our lifetime, right? Because we're passing on that legacy and that intention with the way that we're raising our kids. A lot of us feel this pressure on us. I just got out of therapy like an hour ago, and I was just like, wow, it feel like I was talking about some of my toxic behaviors.
Yeah, I'm
And
gonna.
just,
I cut people emotionally with my words, and that's the thing that I hate doing with my stepdaughter, or even my wife, or people I care about. I often am the meanest verbally
yeah,
to the people closest to me.
yeah, because we feel safe there. And that's what sometimes I have to remind parents about their children. Is like, your children are talking back to you because they feel safe in that relationship. I could never call my mom out, because I would get smacked across the face. Like I couldn't do that, right? And so there's a safety that we feel, but we have to be able to recognize when those behaviors are hurting the people that we love, whether it's our children, whether it's our spouses, our partners, etc. And I think, you know, something that's really important here, and what I brought up to my therapist, I was like, damn, I wish I could just be a toxica without like being aware of it. You know, I feel like my tias are so much happier, and like
Well,
not
it's
being aware.
easier. It's easier to be bad, right? And you know, it's a happy pig or a sad philosopher, right? Sad Socrates.
Yes, but it still hurt, you know, like
Yeah.
it's still inside. And so, and you don't really know what to do with that hurt when when you don't have that awareness. And I was like, damn, you know, like, why does it have to be me that like is conscious? And so a lot of parents feel that. A lot of parents feel like, oh my gosh, like I'm looking at 7 generations back, and colonization and historical oppression, and holy shit, why am I the one that has been made aware of this? And now I have to break these cycles. And honestly, that's pressure that we're applying, that I want to encourage parents or anybody listening to this to know that like we're just planting seeds. We don't have to heal everything in this one lifetime. Like we just have to do what we can right now to be well in us, so that our children can be well in relationship to us, right? And also there is this advocacy and this activism piece too, where we have to know that everybody deserves that, right? And so we have to use the privileges that we have to be able to fight for all parents to be able to have the ability, the access to be in good relation with their children and with each other.
Two things just came up talking to you. I know a lot of Latinos, you know, millennials, people in their 30s, people in their 20s now, who they're not considering having kids. Latinos and Latinas, they're not considering ever having kids. And you know, I know some of them personally, and I know that they had traumatic childhoods, right? And so I've heard the adage of like, when you had a traumatic childhood, you don't aspire to grow up to be a parent, because it's kind of the same relationship. You kind of want to get as far away from that child-parent relationship as possible. I mean, are you seeing that? Is that tied to? I mean, and how do we? You know, I got snipped a year ago. I never planned on having kids of my own because of my own childhood, because I didn't know, I couldn't see myself being a parent. I didn't know what that would look like, what that would feel like, I didn't know, I didn't recognize, you know, dad version of Hector, you know.
Yeah.
Luckily my stepdaughter came along and got, you know, I was able to experience some form of like kind of, being a stepdad is kind of like being a parent with training wheels, right? I can't mess up too bad because her dad, thankfully, is still in her life, and her mom's her mom's her idol. So I get to be kind of like a mentor, best friend, whatever. But are you seeing that like a lot of especially Latinos, like I know a family, 5 daughters, right?
Yeah.
And they're all adults, and there's only 1 grandchild. Now, I'm not saying that, but we all know the stereotype, right? A generation ago, 5 Latina daughters would have created, how many grandkids, right?
Yes, I am. I'm seeing that a lot. My little sister, I'm 35, she's 25. She from very early on said, I don't want to have kids. And I respect it.
Right.
I respect that, and I wish more people had that self-awareness actually to know, like, I don't think that experience is in my capacity. Right? Like, I don't think that is like a part of my journey. And whenever people say, I'm not a parent or I'm not a biological parent, I'm like, you're still nurturing that little version of you though. You're still nurturing and caring for and meeting the needs of that little version of you. And so you do have that nurturing, like, you may not be a father or a mother or whatever, whatever title you want to give it, but you're still responsible for that part of you, and you're still responsible for all children, right? Like, all children are our children, right? So what happened to the kids, and I don't want to burst into tears right now, but like, what happened to kids with gun violence, right? And we're approaching
Yeah.
the anniversary of Uvalde,
Yeah.
and just looking around, and I'm just like, those are our children, right? And so it doesn't matter whether or not that child came from your body. All children are our children, and you're going to at some point engage with a child, right? That could be at a grocery store, or just, if you're a teacher, you engage with kids all the time. And so I want us to kind of move away from thinking that like parenting is only about, you having that child, because all of those 5 sisters, like, they're still going to be engaging with children, right? And so we still have to be able to do this work of decolonizing that view of children. That's actually like one of my biggest hopes, right? That we can see children as people and use that framing with whenever we have engagement with children, not just that biological. So anybody out there that's like, I don't want to have children, I applaud it. Like, that's awesome that you know that. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I just, one of those things that I didn't even fantasize about when I was a kid, but, or just see people as children, right? I've heard that, like, I mean, I still feel like the kid that I was. I just think there's all these layers on it now through time and maturity. But I can remember how I felt and thought when I was, going to puberty and stuff like that, and when traumatic things happened to me. And so, I think we have to remember that everybody used to be a kid, right? And that would soften us. The other thing I wanted to bring up was that, I know this is not it's kind of related. I'm not equating kids to animals, although sometimes, I don't know.
Also, like, all of it, we're human beings, we're
Right,
mammals. We have
right.
this and awareness, but we still very much like to have animal instincts.
That's for sure. Because I have this really bad dog. He's cute. He's a beautiful dog, but he's a biter, and he's a bad dog. And people, especially like, I'm dealing with all these behaviorists, hiring people to help me understand my dog and nonviolence and understanding and relationship. But then I have the old school Latinos, right? People from an older generation who are just like, chancleta, dale una patada, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's the same thing, right? We believe in corporal punishment from colonialism, right?
Yeah. I think it makes sense, right? That like when our parents were growing up, when our ancestors were growing up, after the invasion of Spain onto this land, it makes sense that we would adopt some of these strategies into our families. Porque si mis hijos, like, if my kids don't behave, there's very real consequences. And I say this for like Black and brown kids specifically. Raising kids who are darker in complexion and who are, up against these systems where it's very possible that you could get killed, right? Like, it's very possible that if you do not learn compliance, that you could get killed. And that's like the worst thing that I can imagine as a parent,
Yeah.
right? Is something happening to my kids. like what happened to Tamir Rice, or like what has happened, you know, to so many others. And so it makes so much sense that we would think that raising our kids to be compliant would be what helps them and us as a culture survive. However, what it's doing is it's perpetuating this cycle of oppressed and oppressor, right? And so this is like a slow, this is a slow process, right? Where again, I still find myself yelling. I still find myself wanting that compliance, que se porten bien, que me respeten, like let them respect me, you know. But I have to kind of pull it back and say, like, what am I actually wanting this person to become? You know, and I want this person to become somebody that feels seen, that feels respected. And the only way that that can happen, you know, the only way that I can teach them to see and respect people in that way is if I give them that experience in my home, you know, and if they don't get that experience in my home, then I hope that they get it somewhere else. But we can't, what was the, you know, what does thug life stand for? Right?
The hate you give.
Yes, exactly. And so, I mean, it's very simplistic, but it's so real, right? Like we are, the word in Spanish is inculcando, like we are passing down some of our toxic behaviors without even realizing it. You know, we are passing down some of these ideologies of power over, right? If I win, you lose, we're practicing those things in our families. And so when we recognize that, we have to be able to consciously make the shift to say, I am sacred. I am deserving of respect. I am deserving of love. And so are you, you know, and how do we teach that, right? And how do we enter into relationship with that awareness that you are sacred, that you are deserving of love, that there is nothing wrong with you, that if you do step out of line and there is a serious misbehavior where you are hurting somebody, or, you know, there's harm being done or there's harm being caused, I'm going to set a limit. I think a lot of people think that parenting in nonviolent or more, you know, liberatory ways means that we're not setting limits. And that's not the truth at all, right? We can still set limits. We can still set boundaries. We can model what boundaries look like. My son is 3.5, and sometimes he'll try to hit me if he doesn't like what I'm telling him. And I will hold his hand and I will say, I cannot let you hit me. You know, I cannot let you hurt me. That hurts my body. No, you know. And so, but at no point in time do I scream at him. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just like, no, like that can't happen. And so my oldest is 11 now, and I'm really seeing the ways that, you know, having set the intention from very early on to raise her in this way, to raise her without, you know, the chancletas and like all of these things that maybe I had gotten, I'm seeing that she's able to call me out on my behaviors, you know, and she's able to tell me, like, you're being violent right now with your words and your tone. The other day I was like, I don't like your tone. And she was like, I learned my tone from you right now, you know.
That hurt worse. Right?
Oh no, you know. And she's right? And I have to be able to tell her, you know what, you're right. And maybe not in that moment, but we're going to have that conversation another time. Not that long ago, she was freaking out because somebody had cleaned her room. Like, I have once a month, I have somebody come and help me clean my house. And so they had cleaned her room. And that's like a huge trigger for me too, because my mom used to go into my room and she used to like literally dump out all the drawers onto the floor and be like, limpialo, you know, and I'd just be like, oh my God. So they cleaned her room, and I forgot to tell her when she came home. Like, I wanted to give her a heads up, and I had thought, oh, I want to give her a heads up so that she knows. Pero entró, she came in there and she just freaking lost it, you know, and she was just like, this is my space, you know. And I literally just like, I had nothing in me except like, I wanted to, first I was like, it's okay, you know, like, it's okay, you don't have to freak out. Like, that was my initial, just like, it's okay, like, you know, you should be thanking me because I cleaned your room and like you're asking before. Pero luego I realized that like she wasn't in that place in her brain where she was even able to receive that. And so she ended up sitting on the floor and she's crying, and I sit next to her right behind her, and I just sit there and I put my hand on her shoulder and I'm just like holding that with her, you know. And like the amount of energy that it takes for me to be able to do that is like freaking, you know, I can't even describe, like, because I would never have been able to express my feelings the way that she was expressing them. And eventually, right, with my hand on her, and I started crying too, because it pains me to see my daughter like experiencing such intense emotion. And she wasn't looking at me, but afterwards we kind of processed together, and I was like, do you know that I was like crying with you? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, it's good to cry, like you're releasing it, you know, I want you to be able to release it, porque si no, like we have so many Black and brown folks in prison actually that were not able to release their feelings, their emotions, their internal experiences, and it bottled and it bottled and it bottled and it pressurized and it pressurized and it pressurized until it became this explosion of, you know, violence sometimes, right? And so I want to be able to release that pressure slowly in childhood. I want to be able to give her examples of how to do that, you know, and really sit with her and tell her your feelings are valid. No, we're not going to slam doors. No, we're not going to be throwing, you know, shit across the room. I can't let you do that. I'm going to have to remove those things if that happens. But I'm going to let you know that it's okay to release that pressure, right? And so by the time she's going into adolescence right now, and she's going into adulthood, like I have so much trust that she has this awareness that her feelings are valid and that behavior is not always valid, right? Because the way that I see it is like behavior is just a strategy to meet a need. So at the root of everything is a need. And when your need is not met, that is when it turns into sensations and thoughts and feelings. And those feelings generate behavior, right?
It's interesting because I know this is not a, I mean, I maybe you deal with, I know you deal with families, but like, you know, my wife always say, you never get jealous.
Mm-hmm.
I go, no, I get jealous all the time. Human beings get jealous all the
Yeah.
time. I just don't allow myself to act irrationally on that jealous emotion or anger or anything. You know, you
Yeah.
feel something, but just because you feel something doesn't mean you have to express it and act it out.
Yeah. But it takes so much, like, I forget what it is. Dr. Gabor Mate talks about this, but like for those of us who have trauma, there's oh my gosh, I wish I knew the correct term, but anyway, there's like a pause that we either have access to or don't have access to. The more traumatized we are and the more shit we have to work through, the smaller that is, right? The smaller that threshold is. I think it's called response threshold or something like that. And so for those people who don't have as much trauma, so we see more, you know, people with more privilege and less stressors and things like that, they have the ability to have a wider gap, right? I'm not saying that this is applicable to some people and not to other people. The fact that you are not able, or that you can pause and you don't react and you can respond in a conscious way, tells me that you have done the work of being able to practice that.
I feel like I've done the work. My heart is sore.
Yeah, that's what I mean. But it takes like that's and maybe there were experiences, right, that like showed you, okay, maybe this isn't the way to go.
Definitely.
maybe I don't react like this. But it takes us a long time to get to that point, those of us with trauma, right? And so I just want to encourage people. It's like it's not because, I understand, like it's not because you don't want to be patient with kids. It's not because I don't want, you know, it's not because I want to yell at my kids. It's because I'm healing, right? I'm a healing parent. I have wounds, I have trauma, and I'm not making excuses for the behavior. I'm just naming that it takes me a little bit more than it would take somebody without that same level of traumatic experience. It's fascinating to me, right? And sometimes those things come from generations before us. Like there's things that live in my body that are not from my lifetime, you know, and maybe not from my parents' lifetime either. And so we have to be extremely gentle with ourselves in those processes.
Yeah, there's a saying that's become really popular in the last, 5, 6, 7 years. And I wish it was given more respect, you know, and honored more rather than used as a kind of like a comeback, a clapback. You know, when somebody's, you know, rude or does something mean or whatever, acts out, somebody will say, "Who hurt you?" You know, and they use that as a clapback, right? But that's real. I mean, they should not use it so flippantly, because it's like I've started to see, you know, you analyze yourself, and then the best way to for me is to understand other people, is to analyze what triggers me, what makes me act out in certain ways. And you know, to anybody who thinks that beating your kids is going to turn them into angels, I mean, I was beat, my brother was beat, I grew up with everybody who was beat, and all we became was violent.
Yeah.
You know, we resented the world, we resented order, we resented authority, we resented everything. It has the opposite effect. But now as an adult and as an older millennial in the 2023, I can see that my parents were, and I mean this in the best possible way, it's not a negative, they're just ignorant of what the consequences of their actions would lead to 5, 10, 20 years down the line.
Yeah.
And knowing that violence, it sounds so simple, but they didn't know this, and generations of Latinos and others didn't know this, that violence begets violence.
Yeah.
Violence teaches violence. I mean, that seems obvious to us now, but it's sad that they couldn't see that then.
Yeah, yeah. And we're offering all of the compassion for that experience, right? And again, it is so much about like they didn't have the privilege. They were literally just trying to survive, and so they were surviving by beating us, by hurting, you know. It wasn't a conscious thing. Like there was a lack of awareness, like you said, you know, there was an ignorance, there was a lack of consciousness about the effects. And so there's no blame.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and again, we're human, right? We're human beings, and we're healing human beings, and we're a healing culture. And so just as we have the capacity to, you know, navigate our trauma, so too do we have the ability to create this world that is a little bit more amenable to our healing. And I think we'll get there, maybe not in our lifetime, but we're just planting seeds, right? We're just nurturing those seeds, and hopefully our descendants will be able to sit under these beautiful trees and be shaded by the seeds that we're planting.
And, you know, any advice that I would give to anybody, you know, I'm 38 now, so I haven't been a child for 20 years. And a lot of us are parents. I know this about my parents, that they're different people now. And I wouldn't want, just as I wouldn't want anybody to judge me forever for who I was and what I did as an 18-year-old, I'm not going to hold that against them for what they did to me 30, you know, almost 40 years ago. You know, they've changed. And I remember when I forgave my dad, I live in Vegas, and I flew him out. My brother was here, my sister was here. And we flew him out with the understanding that you know, my brother hasn't forgiven him, but I forgave him. And I told, you know, he showed up at the airport and he was super scared. And I put my hand on his shoulder, and I said, "Don't worry, we're not here to bitch you out. You're safe." You know, I told him those words. But the other thing is that when I saw him, he wasn't the person that I hated, that I feared. He was this old man, right? And I didn't, you know, so it was very easy to, in a way, you can't get that resolution because they change. And so the person that you are angry at is gone forever,
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's true. It's so true. And, you know, for your brother, I'm like, that's his process,
Yeah.
right? And
I respect it.
I think we have to, because it took me however long it took me to get to where I am with forgiving my parents. It's taken you however long it took you. Like, I'll never tell someone you have to forgive. And I think that culturally, because we are a collectivist culture, we hear that a lot. Like, es tu papá, you know, like you have to forgive them. You have to forgive whoever. And it's like, well, that's very easy to say, right? But that inner niña in me is hurting still, right? Like that I'm not there yet, right? And so the more that we can kind of honor that process, right, of connecting back to that part of ourselves, and know that like there's no timeline on it, right? And there are tools that we can access. We can go to therapy, and we can do whatever it is we need to do to do it gently. We should never feel forced to like rush that process, right? And I used to have this expectation that like, okay, I dealt with this, right? Like I dealt with my abandonment wounds, and I dealt with all these things, and I, you know, talked about it in therapy 15 years ago, and it still comes up. It still comes up,
and it'll probably always come up, right?
Yeah. And so it's just like, okay, there it is again, and you know, let me use the tools that I have now. And so it's about it's not about like, you know, pushing all that away and saying, oh, that's in the past. That's another thing that we hear a lot. Oh, that's in the past. Let it go. You know, just forgive, like let things go. It's like, no, it's still there. I'm just more equipped now to be able to hold it in ways and integrate it in ways that, you know, that feel more gentle, right? That feel more aligned with my process. And so it's beautiful that like we're building that capacity as a culture right now, that we're having this conversation, that, you know, this is something that is becoming more normalized. Away from just bonding on the trauma, like we want to be bonding on the healing journeys, and I think that's beautiful.
For sure. My brother's a year and I'm the oldest. My brother's a year and 3 months younger than me, and so I don't remember a time without him. But I dehumanized him for a long time. I realize now, that he was just like an appendage. He was just a shadow. And I thought that everything that happened to me happened to him. But now that I'm an adult, I realize his relationship with my dad was different, and he has different memories of our childhood. And like, so if he's still mad at my dad and isn't ready to forgive him, who am I to say that, you know, hey, it's our dad. Same thing happened to us. No, the same thing didn't happen to us. Actually, he caught more hell than I did because he was more of a rule breaker. So, you know, like you said, it's his process. But I mean, is there any? I was planning on talking to you for 30 minutes, but this is, you know, this was kind of been a goal of mine to talk to the founder of Latinx Parenting, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. Very enlightening. Any like, what's your final message to the world, I guess?
Oh my gosh, I hope it's not the final message to the world.
No, I mean, I'm sure we're going to hear more and more of you.
I think, you know, we really are, we have never been here before, where we survived a pandemic. Those of us that did survive the pandemic, we have never experienced the conditions, the social conditions. We're in a brand new space. And I think what I want to bring into that is just so much gentleness, you know, just so much self-compassion for what we're experiencing as a people. We're looking around and we're seeing what's happening at the border. We're seeing the shootings happening. We're seeing all of these things, and it's traumatizing for us. It's actually activating a lot of our ancestral trauma and our intergenerational trauma that lives in our bodies. And so I want to encourage people to just be in connection with yourself, be in connection with other people, have these conversations, right? Be vulnerable in spaces if you can. You know, I say that I'm like, there's no safe space necessarily, but there's brave spaces. And so I'm really hoping that people do engage in those brave spaces, and that they can show up with their stories, with their wounds, and experience what it feels like to be held. I think that that's, you know, something that I try to do with Latinx Parenting and with the classes and the spaces that I facilitate, is just really give that experience of holding. Because once we can do that, then we can more easily extend that to others, whether it's our children or our partners. And so that's what we're kind of building. So just a lot of gentleness, a lot of compassion for the self, and community, right? Really, really focusing it on building that community of other people who share the same language, not just English and Spanish, and we're also saying like the language of feelings, the language of sensations, the language of the inner niña, the language of just holding, right? And I think that would be it. And I encourage everybody to check out the offerings that we have. I have a Madre Wound Healing Circle coming up at the end of the month. And so that's a free event. We have, I think over 200 people registered for it already. But we also have workshops. I encourage people to check out our Escuelita page. If you go to latinxparenting.org, or if you go to just the link in my bio, you'll see like all of the workshops. And so you can access them, then you'll be a part of the community that is a part of, if you sign up for any workshop, you're immediately entered into the community of people that are having, oh, sorry, my mom was calling. So
How appropriate.
Encourage folks to check it out and see if there's something there that resonates with them.
Well, thank you so much, Leslie. It's been a privilege and an honor speaking with you. And it is Latinx Parenting across all platforms, right?
Yes, definitely.
Thank you so much. And I know, like everybody else, I'll be continuing to follow your work and learn and work on my inner niño through the advice and the content and the work that you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Happy Mother's Day.
Thank you so much, and happy Mother's Day to your partner as well.
Thank you. Pass it on.
Bye.
Thank you.